All right, so we are going to get started now. Are you able to hear us online?
Yep.
Awesome. So just a quick note for those in the room, each table has a mic that you'll have to share. Green's on, red's off. Pretty straightforward stuff. So thanks everybody for joining. I'm Dustin Loop, Executive Director of ISOC DC, and we've been hosting these post-IGF roundtables since at least 2013. That's as far as my memory goes back, but John and Mike might be able to highlight ones that happened before that. But really what we wanted to do this year is really embrace a full roundtable model. So we'll have discussion catalysts that are gonna talk about everything, but we want to make sure that everybody feels free to contribute to this discussion as well. That's one of the great things about the community that we have here is that we're filled with a room of experts that can speak thoughtfully on pretty much anything we're going to discuss here.
Everybody's so shy.
Yeah.
That's the shyest table
Yeah.
there too.
So before we get started, I just wanted to thank DiploUS for partnering with us this year and hosting us here at this, this great room, which is so conducive for a roundtable type discussion. So I will hand it off to Teresa to provide a high-level overview in the way that Diplo always does so well.
Thank you, Dustin. Hi to everybody and to everybody online as well. How many of you have attended the IGF in person? Okay. I don't know about online, but quite a few. How many of you have followed remotely? And how many have not followed at all? Anybody? Yes, this one. Okay.
How was that turkey, man? How was it?
It was awesome. You read the skills though.
That's good. No, but kind of what we did during this IGF and what we have done since, I think, Brazil, was to kind of help everybody either attending in person or remotely or not at all to kind of keep track with what is going on at the discussions. As you know, the IGF is quite a complex event in the sense that you have many sessions running in parallel. It lasts usually 5, sometimes 6 days. And it's quite challenging, especially, let's say, for some smaller and developing countries to attend it because of clearly financial reasons. Now, what Diplo, within its Geneva Internet platform, has been doing for all these years is we have reported from the IGF at various levels. First, we have followed every single session at the IGF, and if things and stars were in our favor, within about 2 hours after the session was finished, we would have a report online. That's, again, quite challenging to orient yourself in. So what we did then overnight is that we summarized kind of the main trends in the discussions for the given day, so that somebody who, let's say, follows a very specific track, big security, human rights, or whatever, can kind of figure out what has been going on. So that was the daily, that was always published kind of in the morning. And then after the event was finished, we produced the final report that you have on your desks. Feedback always appreciated, where we try to kind of look back at the event and from all the discussions that have been going on, figure out what were the main trends, what were the main themes and issues that dominated the discussion. We are slowly recovering from all this, but we hope that this is a useful resource for anybody who wants to kind of know what has happened. Now, looking back at this IGF, it was different from many, many reasons. First of all, everybody who was there speaks about the food and the coffee. So having attended many of the previous IGFs, good nutrition has been a challenge. So Germany has definitely set the bar super high. I do have to note that their budget for this IGF was much, much, much higher than any of the previous, 10 million. And for just Switzerland in Geneva did an amazing job, and Switzerland should be praised for the fact that they really jumped in last minute when kind of nobody wanted to host the IGF, but their budget was 1 million. So when you put the things in perspective, it's quite enormous. So I'm sure that it was amazing for many of the participants, but it's quite a heavy burden for the future hosts. I think Poland, which is the host of the next IGF, is already, figuring out how to assess it. What I also appreciate in the German way of is that they have committed some funds for future IGF, so kind of going beyond, their host country IGF in Berlin. Another aspect where this IGF was much different was the number of attendees. So in person, there were like 3,700, and we have the exact number in the report, attendees. When we, last year's, it hasn't been nowhere like this. I think below 2,000, Susan, you might know exactly. So it's kind of like almost double the amount of people. And we checked with the German partners, like, are these registrations or are these badges that you actually gave to people? Those were badges given to people. So maybe the number of the face-to-face registrations was even higher. And almost 3,000 people followed remotely. So I think that's quite amazing. So speaking about an event that is kind of struggling a little bit to find its legitimacy because of its, doesn't take any kind of decisions for an event that really struggles to attract the attention of governments in general, there is an improvement. Talking about representatives from governments, the number has definitely gone higher, not only in kind of the absolute numbers, but also in the percentage. So that's a very good trend. There were a lot of kind of setbacks, like for instance, the media attention was still very low. IGF is not something that would attract attention of the media, although the number of journalists, kind of media represented at the event, went up. About 3%, I think we have in the report. So that's good. For me, the biggest highlight of this IGF was the parliamentarian track. Like one stakeholder group that I feel has been really missing in the discussions have been the parliamentarians, who obviously are so essential in all the kind of governments in what approach their countries take on digital policy. And here Germany, again, has done an amazing job. So they not only took efforts to really invite representatives from parliaments from all over the world, but they also paid for them coming. So 150 parliamentarians from 56 countries, if I'm not mistaken, attended. And not only attended, but they had like their track at the IGF. And they had program that was kind of tailored, in the main program that was tailored to their needs, to the challenges that they may be having. And also, as one of the few tracks in the IGF that ends with something concrete, there is something concrete coming out of this track. Yeah, so they have kind of issued this Jimmy Schultz call, where they kind of encourage parliamentarians to, let's say, for instance, just a few highlights, consult more stakeholders, because digital policing deserves that, to pay more attention to processes such as the IGF and so on. So I'll probably stop here and I'll go over back to Dustin.
Cool. Well, thank you for that. That helps put everything else in a really good context. So before we actually kick things off, there are two things I want to do. One, just kind of run through the structure. But before we do that, just a quick round of introductions, just who you are and who you're with, if you care to say. Dustin Loop, ISOC DC, as well as IGF-USA.
Melinda Clem, affiliates, IGF-USA.
Teresa Horisova, Diplo.
Hi, Jeff Odlem, a former State Department Foreign Service officer for 28 years, recently retired, now doing national security and technology policy consulting.
Hey, I'm Jennifer Brody with Access Now.
I'm Shiva. I just graduated from the law school. I'm working on my final thesis.
I'm Richard Barnes with Cisco.
Lance Grove, retired from healthcare.
Lance Grove from healthcare IT for 40 years and representing being a citizen. Thanks.
Hi, everybody. My name is Susan Chalmers, and I work at NTIA at the Department of Commerce.
Hi, I'm Pavlina Edelson, and I'm with Diplo Foundation.
Steve Del Bianco with NetChoice.
Rick Lane.
Courtney Raj with the Committee to Protect Journalists.
Peter Stenberg.
Brittany Pioza, Internet Society Foundation.
Anna Loop, doctoral candidate.
Shane Tews, ISOC DC, former, always with IGF-USA, alumni. Right.
John Piha, Carnegie Mellon University.
Judith Hellerstein Associates, as well as ISOC DC, ISOC Accessibility Special Interest Group, and IGF-USA.
Stan Besson, Charles River Associates.
George Sadowski, currently unaffiliated.
Trying to fix that, though, so we have something for George.
Lisa Brenner, AT&T.
Mike Nelson, as of last week, Carnegie Endowment for International Peace.
John Moore, ISOC DC.
Great. And then why don't we do a round online? And Marilyn, please save yourself for last. Oh, we have one more in the room.
Hi, everybody. Rob Peguerero, freelance journalist, currently found at places like Fast Company, Ars Technica, USA Today, and maybe your name here. Hi.
So let's do a round online. And like I said, Marilyn, save yourself for last so that you can provide us with a little bit of an update.
I'm Nazi Shukri.
Jim Prendergast, the Galway Strategy Group.
David Groham, and Telecom Consultant.
Brian Sharp, the Eastern Group. Chip Sharp, consultant.
Dan Caprio, Providence Group.
Rachel Stelly with the Computer and Communications Industry Association.
Susan Moore with CenturyLink.
Am I the last one? Nazi Shukri, MIT.
Jane Coffin, Internet Society.
Well, that might be everybody. Marilyn, would you be able to introduce yourself and provide us with an update on everything that's happening with you?
Thanks very much, Dustin. My name is Marilyn Cade, and I regret not being with you today. I also regret not being with you in person at the IGF 2019, although I did travel to Berlin. So I guess my first update would be, wow, do they have great health care in Germany? For those who don't know, I did my one-day course on day 0 with CLDP, and then I decided to have a health crisis. So if you're planning on traveling soon and you're planning on having a health crisis, let me repeat it, go to Germany. I am back home. I got home Monday night. I was in the hospital for 12 and a half days, and thank you to all of you who came and visited, and especially to some special people who arranged for me to get PJs as a gift, something you really need whenever you go to the hospital. I also saw a lot of you who took time out of your schedules to come and visit. Thank you for doing that. I am repeating many of the tests I had there, and in a search for specialists, because it turns out in the United States, when doctors advertise they're accepting patients, what they mean is 9 months from now. So that's quite an interesting challenge that I am facing. I wasn't able to attend many of the sessions remotely due to sporadic tests, but I have read many of the transcripts and observed as many of the 3 or 4 of the sessions. And I want to congratulate IGF-USA's participants for the active engagement, particularly in the NRI sessions, and also in other sessions that are particularly relevant to what's going on in the changing world of the internet ecosystem. So I look forward to seeing all of you, probably not in person, probably not until mid-January, but I am back and actually able to do that most essential thing, get my hair cut and buy kitty litter. So, you know, I am feeling better since I'm still telling bad jokes. Thanks very much, Dustin, for the opportunity to say hello to everyone and to say thank you to everyone. Anya stepped in and I was supposed to co-moderate the main session, and I left Anya in the lurch big time. And I want to thank some of you for making a really big effort to help her. Because she was, as it turns out, not only doing her day job, doing the things I had volunteered to do, but also fielding a lot of inquiries from people about why I had gone to the hospital. So thanks again, and I will go back on mute.
Thank you, Marilyn, and we're all glad that you are doing better and look forward to seeing you in person, hopefully in the near future. But we'll expect your remote participation in the meantime. So just to kind of run through how we're gonna try to cover everything that happened in the IGF in the span of a little over an hour. While not perfect, we'll use the lens of the 3 themes that were identified in the planning process to kind of group the discussion. And so we'll cover data governance and everything that falls into that umbrella, as well as the digital inclusion track and the security, safety, stability, and resiliency track. Each one will have a few speakers that will kind of be the catalyst of the discussion, and then we'll open the floor on each one. And unlike a kind of panel and Q&A format, we really suggest that you make comments and observations rather than asking questions, because like I said earlier, we're all the experts in the room. So I guess with that, let's get right into the discussion, starting with the data governance track. And I'm going to hand it to Pavlina to introduce that, and then we will hand it over to Shane after that.
Thank you, Dustin. Data governance was identified as one of the 3 tracks, as you said, and I'm quite sure about the legal implications of data governance. Everybody in the room can, you know, sing songs for quite a while and have their own personal experiences with that. So just to be very brief about the topics which were discussed at IGF, the original binary division between the groups which like free flow of data to enable economical and societal progress, and data localization groups which, for whatever reasons, political, security, or economic, would like data localized, was not discussed as much as in previous IGFs. At this time, the discussions were more about types of data. For example, it came out that the issue of data governance is more complex than just this binary view. Different types of data require different approaches, different policy, different treatment, different protection. And for example, one of the discussions within the groups was protection of children's data and using of academic research data. So as far as the life cycle of data, it was shown that within the whole life cycle, meaning from tech standards to data protection by design to collecting, storing, using of data, archiving, deleting, and, for example, anonymizing the data also, there is a need for regulation and for rules. And that came from all stakeholders, including the tech community, which is usually not very fond of legal regulations. So for some of the issues which were raised within the data governance, they are technical solutions, but they are not being implemented because of regulatory insufficiency, let's say. So this urgency was also, with regulating data governance, was also pointed out in relation to the new technologies, especially AI and IoTs. Just to briefly touch on a couple of legal issues which were discussed at IGF. As usually, it was all about balancing multiple interests in policy context and level of development of countries and stakeholders involved. And the main issue was, of course, the cross-border legal challenges. First and foremost, the question of race for regulatory supremacy. In the last 5 years, there is a big distinction between countries who set the norms and who follow them, where the small and developing countries are being disadvantaged at this point, and it causes friction also between countries, as we all see in GDPR, for example. There were a lot of discussions about take down, stay up orders by courts, about highest fines for non-compliance, what effect they should have, what effect should be achieved by them, and how they hurt, for example, small and middle enterprises. Our discussions also were about forced representation, mandating a foreign organization to maintain a physical representation within a country, which is parallel to data localization rules to ease enforcement in that country of the local regulations. And the discussions were also about local court orders with global implications, as, for example, the latest decision of Court of Justice of the European Union in Facebook case, where the national court can, according to CJEU, issue an order with a global effect. So just to sum up, the main issues identified in the legal sphere were global absence of globally agreed frameworks on substance and procedure, issues with enforcement of national and international regulations, lack of forum to discuss concepts with regulatory outcomes, with binding regulatory outcomes. There was discussion about having these as a forum, the UN Commission on Science and Technology and Development. And the last one would be the need for binding and enforceable regulations. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Yeah, I think just before I hand it over to Shane, who moderated one of the NRI sessions where we spoke about data protection, I think the conversation about trying to establish global data frameworks is quite an interesting one when listening to people that are talking from a national perspective and all of the difficulties they're facing just figuring it out locally, trying to either pass legislation or once it's passed, just not being able to implement it either because they're short on resources, or they don't have the will to enforce it, or it's been written in a way that's unclear and undefined. So I think that there's a lot of work to be done, and that the NRIs can be a good vehicle to try to get some movement on the national level before we try to define a global framework, because otherwise it's just going to end up being the GDPR. I know we heard from North Macedonia, who is not part of the EU and therefore doesn't have to comply with GDPR, but in reality they do, because as a small state that does a lot of business with its bordering states that are in the EU, it's de facto law for them. But those are just a few observations on the topic that I had during our discussions, and I'm sure Shane has a lot more as well.
We also found out that North Macedonia is where you go for dental tourism, which is apparently why they have to comply with GDPR, as so many people from the EU go there and they have to share medical records. So it actually was a really great case study about why they have to be compliant, because they're dealing with other regulations that are cross-border. So that was actually, that was very interesting. And then I explained to Marilyn that Germany actually wasn't known for their medical tourism, but she defied the odds. And before we go on to that, I just want to take a step back. And Teresa, on your report, I think that the Germans have raised the bar, and the fact that the others just threw $1 million at it, obviously the number was too low. And now we think 10 million is the new norm, and we'd like to keep it there. Coffee stations open all day, made people very happy, very perky, and they really stayed engaged in the conversation. I'm just saying it helped a lot. But so going to the privacy discussion, just to add to what was said before, I think once people got past their own national borders, there was a very good dialogue about the importance of interoperability from a technology perspective, that doing this in a siloed environment was helping no one, and that what we really needed to be looking at, I know here in the United States, we're talking about, some sort of national preemption, because if you're a mobile operator and you're going from New Jersey to Virginia, you probably don't know exactly when you're handing off and what you need to do or not be doing from a privacy perspective. So you take that on a global idea, and people had very good case studies that they talked about why the things that they're doing and the information that was flowing, wasn't necessarily in a geographic environment that could stop at a locale. And so the idea of interoperability really became a really good point of discussion. I think that will be something that we'll be hearing a lot more on privacy. But I'd like to open it up to you all and people that were part of the discussion. And I know Courtney, I'm just going to ask you to talk about, because I know that journalism is always an example that we use. We talk about some papers have just decided not to deal with certain markets because it's too complicated for them right now. So I don't know if you want to expound on that.
Yeah, sure. So this internet, sorry. Courtney Raj, I'm the advocacy director at the Committee to Protect Journalists, also IGF-USA. And this year we actually launched the Dynamic Coalition for Sustainability of Journalism and News Media. One of those really rolls right off the tongue. Mm-hmm. But I think that one reason it was accepted as an issue of internet governance, which has taken a few years to, I think, convince the community as well as the MAG of, is that there is, I think, increasing realization that so much of internet policy, whether you're talking about the GDPR and privacy regulations, the right to be forgotten, how domain names are allocated and DNS changes, all of these have implications for the news media, and specifically for the sustainability of the news media, as of course disinformation, content moderation, and these other thematic issues that you see a lot of there. So one of the things we've seen with GDPR, for example, is anecdotally that in the US and other non-GDPR required compliant countries, some media organizations have chosen not to be available in Europe because of the costs associated with complying. We've also seen that the right to be forgotten as interpreted by Italian courts is now being applied to the publishers, which was never the intent. Has put some news organizations out of business. One of the things that we really tried to do at this first session of the Dynamic Coalition, is to map out what are the internet governance issues, where are those nodes of overlap, first of all, to try to make it understandable to, say, the technical community or the government community that engages in Internet Governance Forum, why media sustainability is an internet governance issue, and to try to help journalists and media organizations who, as you note, are not very present at IGF, understand why some of the conversations and debates and issues that are on the agenda there are of vital importance to them. So I don't know if you want me to say more, but kind of in a nutshell, that's where we were. We had
a lot of interest. We had a day 0 session that was kind of about the topic of media development and sustainability and internet governance, which had, packed room. And then at the dynamic coalition session, it was also a packed room and lots of interest. So I think that's a good sign.
So just moderator prerogative, because we're also starting to build towards IGF-USA, part of this, anything that you think that we can be doing to start proactively working on that goal for our session in July? We should be working with you on that.
I think that I think making those connections about how these issues around media sustainability, press freedom, even journalist safety issues, which, me, I've been here kind of for the past few years, like trying to put it on the agenda, but it's felt like a little bit lonely.
Mm-hmm.
I think that putting that more front and center and really making very visible and very obvious why these are internet governance issues and why internet governance will impact journalism, which actually matters so much to the sustainability of democracy. And helping elucidate some of the rationale for why those are internet governance issues, I think would be helpful for a wide array of stakeholders. And journalists love when you talk about them and cover them. And so helping, doing something about the media might help the media get interested beyond, the very important journalists who cover this as their beat. But journalists who are covering issues around smart cities, should also be thinking about this. There's a whole range of issues. And so this might be a good way to also broaden the topic. And I'm definitely looking forward to thinking about how we can get this on the agenda for IGF-USA.
I'm just going to say, talk to Steve, because he's the one who helps with the survey together and he knows how to make those things work. Great. Thank you for that readout. And I think that's fantastic that you had such a good response first time on that particular topic at this. Anyone else on privacy or data governance? Judith?
It's Judith Hellstein. I think also, I know we talked about this on the on the North America call, the section on data governance, the introductory topics, which talked about algorithms that groups are using to track and profile people and how that impacts on all aspects of daily life, and also how the algorithms are often not correct, and the companies acknowledge that they're not correct. And so more advocacy on that part on us, and like, okay, well, if they're not correct, they need to be changed, and there need to be places where people can submit changes to get their information corrected.
Good to know.
I just have a point that it's a reflection that what I would do. I think in terms of establishing a global internet network or the legal laws that govern the internet governance, to my experience from my country, and I've worked in this as an attorney, so I understand this, they have our criminal laws and our federal laws to you in America are completely different in terms of establishing a network. For us, defamation, libel, and the First Amendment, we don't have this. So when we go digitally, for us, the courts decide based on the precedents that the criminal law or the civil law that has been in the certain countries. When some of you just got this, the smaller countries were establishing a certain amount of difficulty in facing this and adjusting to GDPR and other international laws. The only reason is because the local laws do not sync with the internet laws. I think that is where there has been this discussion for over 10 years of all of this, is thinking about this and all this abstract ideas of trying to synchronize all the laws. But there was no discussion on how the local laws can be adapted towards the internet laws, because that is like completely distinct and not being taken into consideration. Unless and until that happens, it's impossible for 1 billion people in China and another 1 billion people in India to even approve, and the politics and the local politics and culture will never accept an adaptation of something which is so easy for people in US or in Europe to understand that this is normal. Right to be forgotten is like, yeah, that's a really good law, but that's not as easy as that is going to happen for 2 billion people. Just a thought.
Point of clarification. First of all, I didn't catch where you're from. You're saying what's your original country?
I just graduated from Georgetown, Washington.
Okay, but you mentioned not being native to here, so like your local laws when you were talking about that.
I'm from India.
Okay, from India. Okay, so I just was trying to put context to it. Okay,
I was in the prosecution there. So
great. So then, but when you're saying internet laws, what are you referring to?
In terms of anything, in terms of foreign transactions, I was in the economic offenses.
Okay.
So when we try to get some kind of evidence or anything, there was always that has a huge conflict saying that, no, we do not apply this laws here. Yes, you have the right to claim for this discovery, but we don't, because we don't have this. We said that it happened over the internet, but the general answer that we always get from the country representatives is, no, there's no international law that governs this. Maybe your country has this, our country does not approve this.
Interesting. Mike, you want
to? A couple comments and questions about two things that were cross-cutting and dealt with data governance. First off, how many people went to the session that Bill Drake and Milton Mueller organized on sovereignty and the internet? I thought it was one of the best sessions of Berlin and one of the best sessions I've ever heard at IGF. And if you only have 5 minutes, it's worth listening to Milton Mueller's wrap-up, which was this impassioned call for an internet that is global and empowers the individual. I don't always agree with Milton, but this was really well done, and it did get to the fundamentals. The other question I had was regarding GigaNet, which was something that people don't always know about, but a lot of the academics go to that. I wasn't able to tune into much of it because I was waking up at 4 a.m. and there was competition. But anybody who has something to say about GigaNet and how it dealt with some of these issues, I'd like to hear.
So I'm a member of GigaNet as well, and I thought that they've done a very good job of trying to bring in, real on the ground research, that is pure academic research. One of the things that we talked about at the business meeting was how could we do more to connect GigaNet and the scholarship being done there with the policymakers and technical community and the broader community that comes to IGF. Because back when GigaNet started, and even like in Azerbaijan, it was the only day zero event, right? And so there wasn't the competition that there is now with, I don't know how many there were, maybe 30 or 40 this year, right? Right. So it's not really day zero. And we talked about the fact that there is so much support from the IGF for GigaNet, which is really important to support that fundamental research. But really interesting papers being presented. It's a great way to get a young generation of scholars who are interested in this topic. But I think what I heard coming out of that, and I don't know if anyone else was there, was there is this interest in maintaining its academic rigor and its focus on academia, but also a lot of the academics involved are interested in finding a way to either have research agendas influenced by what are policy priorities, or have their research, for example, inform policy priorities. Like one paper that was presented was looking at media, or it was looking at ownership of ISPs and what that's doing in different contexts in Africa, which has a lot of parallels and not something we really think about, but where there are other things from media capture and communications field that could be relevant to how we think about governance of ISP, ownership, transparency, et cetera. So,
about how many people were in the room for GigaNet?
I think we had 80 people all together, but people definitely flowed in and out. It was a large room at many times that felt a little bit empty.
There's also a report that was circulated on GigaNet that that's a big issue of young academics, is it's really expensive to get to GigaNet, and so that's actually a big hurdle that I've been talking with a lot of my younger colleagues on. But the report is really helpful to sort of get the lay of the land, and so that's something that I think is one of the biggest and best sort of outcomes of GigaNet is it's accessible, to anybody because it's online. So I don't know what the circulation requirements are around that, but that's something that I think is also something important to highlight that comes out of GigaNet is that report and that overview.
And the papers are available. So.
Steve.
Steve Del Bianco. I wanted to give a shout out to an idea that Susan Chalmers rolled out in Berlin, which we should attempt to emulate at our next IGF-USA. She took a tragic incident, the shooting in New Zealand, beamed in the Prime Minister of New Zealand to give a video talk, just to tee it up. And then she had a panel that ranged from corporate, civil society, and then data scientists who could actually talk about how ridiculously difficult it is to know the cultural context of what is offensive and what is not. It was superb. And the element of picking up on an event that everybody knows about, bringing a video presentation from somebody that we probably couldn't get to Washington, D.C. in the late July, right? And one way to limit how long they go on is to do a pre-recorded video. It could be edited. And so suddenly my mind is thinking about all the ways we could organize one of our 75-minute sessions where you could really focus everybody on a video pre-recorded keynote from somebody that sets the table. But great job, Susan.
Well done. Can we watch the video on that session? Because I missed that one. Okay, good.
And
we all know what we're doing during the holidays now. We're going to have to do this all over again in just January after we've watched them and yeah.
And I think that works as a segue to the next topic, which we'll kind of flip a little bit since I'll have you mention the kind of infrastructure security stuff after. But if you want to talk more about the kind of safety aspect of that track and the because that was classified in the
main session.
So if you can elaborate on.
Sure. I mean, I'm happy to do that. I actually organized the introductory and concluding sessions for the digital inclusion section. So I don't know. So maybe we want to circle back to that. But I think that was, yeah, it was just kind of a main session. It wasn't necessarily under one of the themes. So however you want to, if Melinda wants to go first, however you guys want to do this.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah. Go ahead. As a part of it, yeah. So why don't you kick off and we'll let Susan.
So one of the topics that was under the cybersecurity, safety, and resiliency track was content. It came up in a number of ways. Sometimes it was very explicit. The topic, for example, with Susan's session was, removing extremist content. It was very clear what it was. Sometimes it was under a label of harmful content, a panel that unfortunately overlapped with some of that one. Other times it was referred to as DNS abuse, which is a horribly overused term. That really should be much more technical, but ultimately people end up talking about content. The message from Prime Minister Ardern that really struck me and was when she said, look, we can't go about solving any of this if there's not trust and there's not security, right? And I think it was just a really basic common sense plea to people that it ties together something that, and I'll talk about a little bit later in the cybersecurity session, of the overlap between security and trust. And I think she really nailed it, and it was good to see that. I think that's all. Yeah.
Okay.
Sure. So, and just to thank you very much, Steve, for your kind words on that session. I should say that I was one of two other co-organizers, three co-organizers in total. So we did work very hard to put that session together. It took about 5 months. And we were really happy with how it turned out. And the video is on the IGF website if you'd like to watch it.
Okay, just jump in to say a little bit. I think that's a really good lesson for us to learn, is that it took 5 months and then you came out with a really good product. So, when we have the availability of time, which we do now going into July, we should use that, because the time value of money is, the closer we get, the less, the more expensive it is and the harder it is to get it planned. So please be our shining example.
Happy to. I should probably note that I'm a member of the multi-stakeholder advisory group at the IGF, which means that I do kind of have an extra kind of homework load when it comes to participation in the IGF. As a MEG member, I was assigned to the digital inclusion theme, which is, of course, one of the 3 themes that was at the IGF, around which the IGF was organized, which meant that we evaluated all of the workshop proposals that were submitted under that theme. And there were over 100, and we could only take about 20. So that was something I wanted to note, that this year was significantly different in terms of the organizational approach that we took for the program. Significantly less workshops that we had seen before, with a subsequent increase in different types of sessions like open forum sessions and dynamic coalition sessions, NRI collaborative sessions, best practice forums, dynamic coalition sessions, flash sessions. It's a lot of different sessions to choose from. But I'm very happy to give kind of an overview of the digital inclusion introductory session. Unfortunately, I was not allowed to kind of steep myself into all the workshop sessions as much as I would like, because there's a lot of other stuff to do as a USG participant to staff your senior staff, and I can say a little bit about USG participation if it makes sense later. But in terms of the digital inclusion introductory session, what we did is we had a keynote speaker. It was Ms. Doreen Bogdan, head of the ITUD, who gave us a beautiful introductory speech of about 15 minutes, and she had a lot of time for questions and back and forth with the participants of the session. So it was really nice collaboration, collaborative exchange for that intro section. But then we broke out into different sub-themes, discussion groups. Now, the way that the digital inclusion working group kind of categorized the workshops that came in under the theme was kind of similar to the OSI model. We started with the categorizing workshops that focused on the infrastructure. So we're talking about access policy. There, the breakout groups discussed, broadband policy, how to extend connectivity to underserved communities. There were many workshops on community networks. And then we had a discussion about how access, of course, is the first step, but then you have to discuss accessibility. And I'll turn to Judith later if you want to tag on. But we did have a lot of discussion about the challenges that those who have disabilities face when trying to access content on the internet. What was interesting to me is that we also discussed accessibility in terms of language and linguistic barriers, which then kind of segued into another sub-theme that the MEG working group found within the digital inclusion track, was that of local content and multilingualism. And there we canvassed how to support and promote and grow local content or locally relevant content, and also the role of universal acceptance in extending or lowering barriers for people to be able to access government services using their own emails and domain names and non-ASCII scripts. Accessibility then, this is kind of a string, turned into the next sub-theme, which was skills, innovation, and jobs. And we were talking about digital literacy as important to be able to participate. in jobs in the online economy. And there's another inclusion aspect, which I think might not often go discussed, is the inclusion of different businesses and SMEs with in participating within the online economy. So we're talking about inclusion not just as kind of an individual, from a personal individual perspective, but also from an economic perspective of different businesses. And then finally, that led to a discussion about social inclusion. And then at the very top was inclusion and governance, and how, well, one workshop in particular focused on inclusion of different perspectives at ICANN. So that was kind of the narrative, which I thought was really interesting, that came through during the digital inclusion session. And then I guess, I mean, Judith, I know you wanted to.
Just before we get to accessibility, we do have Jane Coffin on, and
great.
she's in London. So
Wonderful.
give her the opportunity to speak and hopefully get some sleep and talk about access and community networks and what happened over there. So Jane, take it from here.
Thank you, Justin. I just wanted to add, and I appreciate you letting me have a chance to hop in here. We've been using and many of our partners on community networks have been working through the IGF as a forum for community gathering and for movement building, particularly with our colleagues at the Association for Progressive Communications, APC, and community networks around the world. It really was Luca Belli and another fellow named Nico Ashanis, who's with Ultramundi in Argentina, who started using the IGF, and then we tagged on with them and helped move things forward. But Luca and Nico started something called the Dynamic Coalition for Community Connectivity. It's one of the DCs that I think has been super effective and working throughout the year online. Luca's put many books out, and so we'd take you, I would recommend you take a look at some of his publications that many in the community have contributed to. But it was 2016 in Mexico where it was a really amazing sort of mashup of people coming together, talking about community networks, building the momentum, and it's what I call the human chemical network reaction, or the human networks that build the nets. And we've been working with communities since then and scaling up the work that we do, and our other colleagues supporting them with funding and support, training, and other over the last 3 to 4 years. So we did have, as Susan had mentioned, several panels on community networks, one specifically on gender, and it's really cool to see a lot more women getting involved in community networks. And also the fact that we took as a baseline with APC that we would move forward with suggestions about community networks, not as a thing that should exist, but that does, and that it's now almost a given, and to just keep asking for feedback. So we use one of the sessions, which I have to put some notes together on, to get out to the community for more feedback on CNs and what we can do to work with more community actors and more colleagues around the world to get community networks accepted, work with governments, policymakers, and regulators to make sure that community networks are starting to be authorized, licensed, spectrums available, and that hopefully universal service funds will start to be used to fund them. But in any event, IGF has been a great forum for this, and we super appreciate all the colleagues that have been working with us on this across the world. But I just wanted to mention this, and thanks for the opportunity to hop in.
Awesome. Thanks, Jane. And on top of that, all that access that you guys are working on, there's the issue of accessibility, which Judith can speak to.
Yes, this is Judith Taliesin. And I also do want to give a shout out for the DC3, the Dynamic Coalition. And they put together a nice series of books every year where members of the community contribute to. But so it is a great session. But talking about when Susan was talking about the inclusion topic, is that we were discussing, Doreen Bogdan talked about what they're trying to move to, what something called meaningful connectivity, and what really is access. And there was a lot of discussion on access, and then Mohammed Shabir, who heads up the accessibility SIG, special interest group, was talking about what access means for people with disabilities or specific needs, and that focusing more on the importance of standards, because those people use screen readers or other type of devices to read through and use the internet, and when they can't do that, there's a problem, and they can't get access to the things. And he even talked about even trying to get his visa from Germany, that everything was online. He did it online, and then he got to a point where there was a CAPTCHA where there was no one for visual, and he had to find another person to go in and read through what he was supposed to punch in. So there's really very limits. So we want to make sure, that's why standards are so important, because if you're going to use the web content accessibility guidelines, which are standards for the web, which are closest thing to standards for the web, we're not going to have these issues. And most of the problem is that developers who use these are not necessarily following these, or not realizing, or not aware that they could easily tweak things differently, so that when we talk about accessibility, that we can really make sure that the internet is for everyone. And so we had a variety of discussions about content guidelines, not only in the accessibility sessions, but later on, there's a series of different other sessions on accessibility. And that also brings up the local content, is that oftentimes when things get translated into different languages or out of different languages, terms that may not seem offensive to some can be very offensive to others. And so therefore, many of these are more translation issues or not a lack of awareness issues. So we also have to learn about, okay, what is our intent, and maybe explain the intent so that people are aware. I know many of the people in the accessibility track were very, didn't like certain titles because they talked about people not as a person first, but as a disability first. And so it's also very important to be aware about people's sensitivities, and that has a lot to do with local content, local languages. But that is, so the issues are literacy and disability issues, and we are looking, the accessibility special interest group is looking to, we are just ramping up our activities for this coming year in writing blog posts and writing others to get more involved. We're also very much involved with the Dynamic Coalition on Accessibility and Disabilities, and trying to move that forward. And so there was a lot of different discussions on different other things, whether from Brian Scarpelli from the App Association had a great panel on disability, people with disabilities writing applications and apps and mobile apps, to other types of programs on local content and other areas. So there was a wide variety of sessions on accessibility issues, which was really good to see. And I think that broadens the IGF out to many different areas. So if anyone's interested in getting more involved, talk to me. Happy to talk more about the accessibility SIG.
Great, thanks, Judith. And in terms of the cybersecurity track, is there anything on the technical side that you wanted to cover or introduce? And then after that, I want to go to Teresa to talk about the capacity development side of that.
Sure. Thanks, Clem. The cybersecurity, safety, and resilience track cast a fairly wide net. As I mentioned earlier, there was a lot of discussion about content, or sometimes called DNS abuse. There were several sessions that talked about sort of the mechanics of who enforces these sorts of things. There were sessions talking about norms and the implementations of norms. Overall, I'd say a lot of the sessions were rather tactical in their discussion, which is actually quite useful, right? Where people are exchanging ideas on how things are whether it's an NRI session and they're talking about the specific actions that are taking, the country or region, and you can learn and share from that depending on, what's going on in your country, as well as just the on some of these content issues and the DNS abuse issues. It gives people an opportunity to really understand all of the different actors and the roles that they can play. And then from that, you have a good output of saying, what should the role be? A lot of these things are, I find they're much more helpful when we have these sort of tactical discussions that are real life examples of, well, this is actually the process, right? Okay, we've got this harmful content over here that's, a clearly extremist content. People's lives are in imminent harm. This is the path for dealing with that. But if we have something over here and there's a judgment call, when you actually walk through the scenarios, which a lot of these sessions did for, varying different types of cyber events or specifically on harm, which was such a huge theme, I think it really helps everyone involved get a better sense of there's not a silver bullet. This, we say, oh, there's a takedown. There's a lot that goes on behind that. You just can't give that to one party and all your problems go away, right? So I found that aspect of it to be very useful. The second thing that observation I'd like to share is that there's, as I mentioned before, there's this overlap of security and privacy and trust. And while the three do not operate in a vacuum, they do need to be treated somewhat differently when it comes to how it is that you, when it comes to the solutions and, identifying the problem you're trying to solve and understanding, who are the actors and where you're going to take some sort of an action and who's going to take an action, whether it's, government making a regulation, it's a private sector coming up with something on their own. It's important, I think, as we continue these dialogues and we go out through the years, both at IGF-USA and in other venues, is to really make that distinction that, this is security. And by and large, I think most of the sessions, people agreed that, nobody was sitting there, arguing for a closed internet. Yay. Nobody was, talking.
Chinese accents arguing pretty strong.
Well, I'm going to just put a pin in that for now. One of the discussions that would have been nice to have more of that we didn't talk about a lot was encryption and the importance of encryption, and that's another great example, right? To talk about how the interplay between security and privacy, for example. If you start weakening encryption, well, there goes privacy, right? Suddenly, I don't have as much privacy as I should have. And then if people feel that they don't have it, then that results in a lower trust, right? So there is a little bit of a flow between these things. And when you want to talk about solutions, it's really important to clarify sort of where you are, both what the problem is you're trying to solve, and then very clearly where you are sort of in the internet stack. And that was another sort of tactical thing that was really useful in these conversations to say, well, this is what's happening at the infrastructure layer. Here's what's happening, at an application layer, and the distinguishing between each of those. The other useful thing that came out of it, I think, was that I didn't feel that there was a strong call for more content. I think the discussion, for content removal, I think that we didn't really get anywhere with it, but at the same time, I think people were more enlightened and aware of the complexity of the issues. and all of the parties, which I think is, again, it goes back to how do we come up with solutions and what are the actors involved. And finally, I want to note that it's also incumbent on all of us. One of the greatest challenge that was discussed was bringing the right people to the table. This was something I heard in several sessions of, who really should be responsible for that, and are they participating, and it's not just a matter of saying, oh, well, we have a couple of tech companies, or we have a couple of people from government. Are they the right people from government? Are they the right types of tech companies? Are they represented across the stack and performing all the various functions? So I think that's a good takeaway for all of us, to just make certain that we're trying to get more people involved and spreading the word here, because that'll help us all in the end.
And in terms of making sure the right people are in the room, we also want to make sure we're training the right people, right? So do you want to touch on the capacity development angle?
Yes. Capacity development, it might not be kind of the most sexy issue. On the other hand, it is an issue that traditionally has been very present at the IGF. Like the capacity development tag would be often linked to many, many, many sessions. Just maybe to zoom out, the best capacity development is policy immersion in real events, real activities. So again, going back to Germany and the fact that they also facilitated a presence paid for participants from Global South countries to attend the IGF, that they can experience an event they otherwise wouldn't be able to follow. I see it as really efficient capacity development kind of takeaway from the IGF. When it goes to sessions that tackle the issue of capacity development, so many sessions were really focused on the kind of basic digital literacy, or the need that schools should integrate more digital skills into their curricula. So that was definitely present. Where I always am critical is that capacity development is like when you don't know what to write in your speech, write something on capacity development. Everybody will agree. Nobody will say, everybody say, oh, this is needed, this is such an important thing, but fewer would be talking about kind of how to practically make it happen, who should pay, and so on and so forth. Now, this year, and that's just my personal reflection, might have been a bit different from the point of view that the IGF Plus, and I'm opening a little bit the other bucket, has been a big topic. It came up, through our language analysis like 60 times. People were talking about IGF Plus at sessions. For those of you who might not be familiar, this is one of the kind of models suggested by the UN high-level panel on digital cooperation. And in this model, there is this so-called help desk element, which basically is like capacity development. Nobody knows what type of capacity development this would mean. Nobody knows what kind of help the help desk would be offering. But the good thing is that discussions on this have started. The UN Under Secretary General, has kind of a working group that are working on this. So let's see what comes out of it. But at least there is something like very practical on the capacity development aspects, and I'll probably stop here.
Thank you for that. And I think the kind of IGF Plus discussion provides us a good transition into kind of thinking about how the IGF-USA should be looking at this next year, which is kind of hard to say because, like Teresa mentioned, a lot of the suggested elements of an IGF Plus are still kind of misty in terms of what they might actually look like. I actually sat in on a session that was supposed to be a pilot of sorts for the intersectional aspects of an IGF Plus, where but I didn't find that it provided much different from a typical session where people break out into groups. And I find, reading through some of the suggestions about the advisory group, for example, how does that differ from the multi-stakeholder advisory group? Is it the same thing, just in a different vision? And is it a shifting of structures, or is it just a shifting of power dynamics? And how does that all come together? So I think that's something that we should probably have another meeting on as more developments happen on that front. And I think that both within this kind of larger ISOC DC community and the IGF-USA community, it's something that we should really be following and aware of and figure out how we fit into this context. With that, we have about 15 minutes, and one would like to think about the themes and kind of approaches we should be taking for IGF-USA 2020. We'll be planning our, we'll be kicking off our planning process in about a month. We usually kick it off in January with an open call for topics, and then survey the community following the results of the call for topics, and then break out into different teams focused on particular issues and try to develop the best possible session on, typically we've done 8 different topics, but we're always looking for innovative ways to cover those topics and figuring out what we should be talking about to be relevant part of the global. I saw your hand go up, Steve.
Yeah, earlier, the notion of a tactic of using a pre-recorded video to kick off a particularly keen topic with a limited intervention, that's a tactic. A thematic lesson learned from Berlin was mostly I would observe what Patrick Zhu, XU, he's a professor in Beijing, and his post on Circle ID just the other day, December 1st, you've got to read it, because he comes away saying that we would judge these national approaches to internet governance not by what countries say they want, but where they grant exceptions. It's a freaking brilliant way to look at it. He said, China, everybody says free flow data information, free expression. Well, where do you grant exceptions? And China grants exceptions when it comes to social order. The US does when it comes to military defense and security. Europe does when it comes to either privacy or the fear that big American companies are edging out European economic interests. And so assessing where the exceptions is a way to really learn what people's values are, not just by what they declare, but all the exceptions. And let's think about maybe featuring that sometime next summer.
Mike Nelson with a quick question. Where was this published?
Circle ID, Patrick, December 1st.
And it's
circleid.com.
The spelling again is
XU.
XU. Okay. Just another challenge to the group. It's not too late to think about putting in proposals for IGF Global 2020.
It's too early.
It's not too, well, whatever. It's not too late. It's not too early. It may be too late if we don't. I mean, we've got to get ideas out there, and if we're going to try to, particularly try to ensure that there's space on the agenda, we need to start lobbying our MAG members, because the call for proposals goes out, and it's 3 times harder to get a new innovative idea in there if there's not some hook you can hang it on. This year it was all about there was artificial intelligence everywhere, because that was an interest. But there's other things that we should be talking about that weren't on the agenda, that weren't in the call for papers.
Can I just follow up to that with a very practical announcement? But I should also say, I think the exceptions, looking at the exceptions, that's very interesting. That's a good idea. Yeah, I like that idea a lot. So the first MAG meeting and open consultations, the date is already been announced, which is excellent, as January 14th through the 16th. So presumably that means that there will be a call for input to the IGF in time for folks to be able to synthesize all that information and discuss it in Geneva on January 14th. So that is coming up. So that opportunity for early input is right around the corner, Mike.
And that's also, I know Susan's also going to say that they are accepting comments now and any comments or other discussions you had on the past IGF, so that they can work and improve it. I know that's also on the topic to be discussed, because they always want people to get them feedback on what worked, what didn't work, what needs to work. So if you have any of that, please send it in. And where do we send it, Susan?
So yeah, I think it's probably all part of the consultation process. They normally call it a taking stock and looking forward, as you may well remember, Mike, from your MAG years.
Way too much. Is there a deadline of sorts?
I'm sorry, I haven't looked at the deadline. I don't know if the announcement has been made yet, but in any event, it would of course be on the front page of the IGF website.
I'm guessing free food and free coffee and espresso is top of the list for the next one.
And German funding.
And German funding, absolutely. I like to get back to, and Lydia was speaking before about the press and focusing on that, because I think that is such a huge issue. So however we can move that forward, as a person who worked for a company at one point that owned 70% of the English language newspapers in the world, trying to get the press attention was still hard. And so, so just saying that I think it's a really interesting way, but I think we have to look at it from a variety of dynamics. When they were talking about security, I remember being with our Wall Street Journal people, talking about intellectual property, and the general counsel had to leave the meeting to talk about the almost $500,000 we were spending on security of our reporters in Afghanistan, and yet people were taking their stuff and just cutting and pasting it. And so security gets to actually having revenue, as we look at free speech and investments, we have to make sure that we're looking at all aspects of it. And security is a big piece for reporters, but that costs money. And if there's no money to be made, you're much safer in your basement somewhere in mom's house versus being on the ground in Afghanistan. So.
Justin, it's Jane. I just wanted to make a note for folks that some of us will be up in New York on Monday, Tuesday there's an experts group on digital inclusion as part of the high-level panel follow-on, and we'd be happy to send people some updates. I'm speaking, I think, on the first day. I can't remember at this point, but we're happy to provide information. I think we're going to be on that group moving forward, but it's about the importance of, obviously, some of the topics that people have spoken about, access, infrastructure, and more.
Thank you, Jane. Definitely we'll look forward to that update and kind of keeping tabs on what's happening over there. And is there anybody else? I know we've been dominating the conversation in the room, so I want to open it up to see if there's anybody online that would like to say a few comments, either just general or about IGF-USA 2020, which will be kicking up the planning soon. I'll just open that up. And if not, quiet group online.
Did you mute them all? I mean, I can't believe that quiet.
Yeah, even the chat's quiet, I gotta say.
Cool. Did you have any closing thoughts, Teresa? Go ahead.
I just thought in the event it might be useful and helpful for the folks here as I think the sole government person here is government stakeholder. Just despite the fact that it was over Thanksgiving, we did have a pretty good group of USG participants. I mean, governmental participation in the IGF is one of the challenges that we're trying to surmount, certainly not from our side, but from other governments. We had 3 high-level folks participate and travel to the IGF this year. From, of course, Rob Strayer from the Department of State. We had NTIA's acting Deputy Assistant Secretary participate, Doug Kinkoff. And then there was also the FBI Executive Assistant Director on Science and Technology So the FBI attended for the first year, which I thought was interesting. And then we, as one of the few people who was able to see Maryland in action, we did join the Commercial Law Development Program on day 0, and the Department of Commerce CLDP did bring a delegation of, say, about 30 folks to the IGF to participate from Afghanistan, Pakistan, the Maldives, Bangladesh, and Nepal. So I just wanted to throw that in if folks were interested in USG participation.
Yeah, and a couple of people from the CLDP will also members of ISOC chapters too. Just to throw that in.
Do we have any data on the increase of numbers, like who did come? Like, why were there more people? Was it
business, civil society, and government?
I'm sorry, on the numbers, you had talked about the increase. And I'm just thinking for like IGF-US, what was their secret sauce to increase their numbers of participation? Was it, and how can we replicate that?
Yeah, we have the percentages. So for instance, civil society went down 42%. Government went up from 16 to 21. International organizations down from 7 to 4. Private sector down by 1%, 19%. But still, this has been a challenge also because of the SME track. Maybe that might have, yeah.
All the last 3 were in Europe.
Yeah.
And therefore, the same geographical.
But we have businesses in Europe as well. Tech community the same, media from 1% to 3%. But yeah, secret sauce, yeah, that's hard to tell. Yeah.
I'm just thinking, as we're looking at IGF-US, how do we create greater interest? Press is always going to be difficult to get them interested, but participation and here, how do we do it? And it's just something we should think as we're looking at issues. What will bring people in? The dessert and the vegetables.
Right. I guess it's probably varies by stakeholder group, and it'd be good to see the USG involvement in the global IGF be mirrored at the IGF-USA. So hopefully we'll see some more. I mean, I know we'll see Susan there, but John.
Yeah, this is John Moore, and I thought one of the things that was strengths of the last IGF-USA was the sort of different topics that actually brought people in from different groups that had not been involved. So one of the most important is when you come up with the topics and the people, find new people that are concerned but have never been asked.
Dustin?
Hey, Dustin?
Yeah, I hear 2 voices online.
Oh, sorry about that. I hope it's...
I guess you have the floor now.
Thanks. I just wanted to note that I did post in the chat. I would say somewhere around 150 plus people were funded through German government funding. A number of them encountered significant problems with visas of the, just to go back to the CLDP program, usually we have around 15 attendees. We had 22 from Afghanistan, many of whom paid for themselves this year to attend. And I just wanted to mention that because it shows the benefit of the repetition of including people that they then become involved themselves. The other thing that I will note is in the past, in the earlier days of the IGF-USA, we did try to bring in not just government, but also some of our own parliamentarians for a special session or two. And that sometimes is a way to attract media interest, as long as we are clear that we're really focused on an internet governance issue and not a political debate. So perhaps we can think about whether there's a way to attract one or two of our members of the U.S. Congress on an internet governance issue, whatever that issue might be. Thanks.
Yeah. Thanks, Marilyn. And we're pretty much at time, but I heard who else wants to speak online?
Dan Caprio. Actually, I just wanted to add on to what Marilyn was saying. I think we've had some tremendous high-level speakers in the past, and I think we need to be strategic about who we want to invite this year. I mean, obviously, you know, you've had FTC commissioners, you've had Chairman Olhausen, but we need to make it easier for the media. I mean, I know last year or in July, when we had Diane Ronaldo and Christine Wilson at like 8:30 in the morning. The press is just not going to show up at 8:30 in the morning. But I think we need to be strategic about who we invite, and I second Marilyn's idea for members, because this is a trade town. You know, the media will cover a member or a member of the FTC or senior official, but we just have to, let's just think about our timing, you know, so that it's not like first thing in the morning or the end of the day. And I know some of that's based on their schedule, but let's just keep that kind of front of mind for press.
Well,
that's a great observation. Thanks, Dan.
and,
so basically, we shouldn't start before 10. Yeah.
Right. Well, we'll kick off with the lunch and get started after that. But I think that pretty much concludes. We're over time at this point. If there's anybody who arrived at this meeting not by receiving an email from ISOC DC or IGF-USA, please come talk to me so that I can make sure that when future meetings like this are convened and when we start planning the IGF-USA, that you can be a part of the process.
Thanks everyone for joining online.
Yeah. Thank you all.
Yeah.